Certainly in the Second World War, this was the pinnacle of Special Forces operations. So they start with the recce parties, then they parachute men. And the key thing about that is they have something called a phantom team. So a phantom team is a strategic communications team. So they can radio directly back to Britain and call in both air supplies and also call in airstrikes. So this is actually fast forwarding to modern special forces. This is the beginning of what, you'd consider Delta Force doing in Afghanistan or something. This is the future.
Hello. In the early hours of the 6th of June 1944, D-Day, a small unit of SAS reconnaissance troopers parachuted into southeast France to begin Special Forces operations against the Germans as part of Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion of occupied Europe. Tom Petch joins to discuss the planning and operations by the Special Air Service during June 1944, which, as you heard at the top there, became the modus operandi for so many Special Forces units in the decades following. This is the second part of our D-Day special series, which culminates on Thursday the 6th of June with Gordon Corrigan and Philip Blood joining to talk about the Normandy landings themselves. Please do share the pod and help us grow. Coming up, we've got the Film Club with The Longest Day, Valkyrie, and the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, and more great history including the 16th century hunt for the Spice Islands, the ancient Greeks, and plenty more. But until then, I'll hand you over to me, Tom Petch, and D-Day, the SAS. Tom, great to have you back on the pod. Thanks very much for joining me.
Great to be here. Oi, great to be here again.
And so for sharp-eared listeners, Tom is the author of Speed, Aggression, Surprise, The Untold Secret Origins of the SAS. And so you've been on a few times, Tom. Last time was a fun chat with Gavin Mortimer. Gavin Phony Major Mortimer.
Phony Major versus, whatever Major,
But so today, though, this is part of the D-Day series. So listeners will have listened to Saul David covering Pegasus Bridge last Saturday. Today's episode is Tom is going to be dealing with the SAS on D-Day and in the days after. And so this is a really interesting story. I was reading about it in your book. So I think we probably need to start with, I detected it was only a sentence in your book, which suggested to me there was actually quite a lot here that you probably wanted to get in, and your editor said, maybe we're getting towards the end of the book. Because there's some dispute as to whether the SAS are under the command of Eisenhower, who is the Supreme Allied Commander, or Montgomery, who's the Land Forces Commander.
Yes, correct. So I think this goes to the nub of the difference between the Special Air Service and the Parachute Regiment. And they share the same genesis. So when you had Saul on, he talked about 2 Commando, which got turned into the Special Air Service. So I would argue, because I was in the SAS, not the Paras, that the SS predates the Parachute Regiment. Now, obviously, you're going to get some flack in your comments for that, because all the Paras will go, no, they're just hats. But actually, the SS was the first outfit, and they carried out Operation Colossus, which was the aqueduct raid in southern Italy in 1941. And the point about the Special Air Service was, from their inception, they were strategic troops. So they were commanded by the force commander. And then that was continued when they were created in North Africa, because they were recreated then in the image of the UK outfit. They were created in North Africa by David Stirling, with a little help from Dudley Clark, more than a little help from Dudley Clark, who was the head of deception out there. And that outfit was commissioned by Claude Auchinleck. So they were always controlled by the force commander, who's the highest commander. So if you cut to 1944, that would be Eisenhower. But the SAS and the Parachute Regiment share the parachute. So when the SAS was regrouped in Britain in the run up to Normandy, they were put under command of Boy Browning operationally. Well, they weren't put under command operationally. They were put under command training wise. So you've now got one SAS, which is Paddy Main's outfit. You've got 2 SAS, which at that point was Bill Stirling's command, along with the 2 French SASs. And they were first of all, included in the Overlord Airborne Plan. And I have to sort of segue a little bit. The Overlord Plan revolved around, as you know, landing in Normandy and pinning German troops in Pas-de-Calais, right? And the initial plan for the SAS was they would be, quote, scattered like confetti between Brussels and the Normandy beachheads to prevent the Germans reinforcing Normandy. And that was the 21st Army Group plan, Monty's plan.
Can I ask you a question here then? If that
Yeah.
were, because we're going to get to why that didn't actually happen, but if they had done that, what's the total number of SAS they could have actually dropped?
Well, they were going to drop 1 and 2 initially, so that's roughly that's a battalion each. So that's 500. So it could have been up to 1,000 men deployed,
Covering Brussels to Normandy?
Brussels to Normandy. So we're talking small groups. You've also got the two French and then the Belgium SAS, but they were not going to be deployed initially. It was going to be 1, 2, possibly 3 in that initial plan. But there's another thing going on here, which is you'll know about Operation Fortitude, which is the deception operation for Normandy. So the Operation Fortitude was this idea that Patton had an army group in Kent, and he was going to cross the Pas-de-Calais and invade Calais. And the good thing about that plan, it was a plan envisaged by a guy called Strangeways, who worked in Montgomery's headquarters. He was the head of deception. Used to work for Dudley Clark, who's the kind of Machiavellian maverick head of deception for the British Army. Anyway, Strangeways is a direct disciple of his. And he thought, well, the thing to do with the Normandy invasion is we will pretend that this army group is hanging around, and even when we're ashore at Normandy, they're still going to come across. So the SAS has always been involved in deception, and the idea that you suddenly get parachutists turning up that far along the coast would obviously then encourage Hitler, Rommel, and the rest of them to keep the panzers that way. So it was part of a very big overall plan. The problem, of course, with that is the SAS would have got wiped out. It was just a suicide job. There is no way, as we know, if we fast forward to Market Garden, there's no way lightly armed paratroopers could have done anything. And a lot of their role would have then become, sort of setting off Berry flares and making a lot of noise and pretending there were a lot of panners in that region. But actually, they would have, I think on the original operator, it said something like, we can't tell when we're going to get them back because we don't know when they'll be able to regroup. And I would have added, because they won't be there. They'll either be captured or dead.
Yes, that was quite an amusing line, because there is an argument as well. It's not just that this was considered and then discarded. There was a bit of a row about whether this idea...
Yes, there was. So what happened was it was clear to both Paddy Mayne and Bill Sterling that this was going to be a bad operation. Mayne doesn't seem to have fronted up. It's Bill Sterling who went to Boy Browning and had a massive row, during which he was basically sacked. As he said, I had to put my bowler hat on and come back. There's a bit of a backstory that I have to touch on this a little bit, which is that Bill Sterling had a bit of a credibility problem with his own unit because he just put down a kind of mutiny within 2 SAS on the way back from North Africa, which had been led by a war hero called Milbank, who'd won a military cross before Dunkirk. And so at the same time as he's having a row with Boy Browning, his own mess were kind of trying to get rid of him. So I think he fell between two stools there and ended up getting sacked. He didn't have the support of his own unit, and he's just had a row with his commanding officer. But that flagged that there was a problem with this operation to the Americans, to Eisenhower's command. And they were not happy when they discovered that the Special Air Service, which they considered strategic troops, were going to be annihilated on D+1.
What was Monty thinking?
Monty always thinks about his own. Well, you know what Monty thinks. We all know what Monty thinks. I mean, Monty is going to get ashore and he's going to get the job done. That's what he's always going to do. The periphery of that is, he doesn't worry too much about what anyone else is going to do. He doesn't think about deep penetration operations in the south of France because that's not in his wheelhouse.
Right. Okay. So you've alluded to roughly where the SAS do get dropped.
Yeah.
And this is nowhere near Normandy. It is Dijon in Burgundy.
Yeah. Yeah, if we just so the only problem with this was they did keep part of the detection operation for the SS. It was called Operation Titanic. Can you believe they called it Titanic? So they decided some of the SS were going to go down with the ship, and to placate Monty and Strangeways, they sent Michael Foote, Professor Michael Foote, not the leader of the former leader of the Labour Party, who was the intelligence officer of the SS brigade. They sent him to go and tell Paddy Mayne that he had to parachute a troop near Brussels to create a furore and stir up the Germans. And Paddy Mayne told him to get lost. He said, "I'm not doing that." At which point, Foote then went across to 2SAS and spoke to Brian Franks, who'd replaced Bill Sterling after he got sacked. And Franks said, "Fine, you can do that." So unfortunately, the rump of that operation existed. There was a small team parachuted into northern France to let off ferry flares and detonate paragons, which were these fake SAS men that exploded on landing. So that remained. But you're right, the majority got
What happened to them, though, Tom?
They made it out, actually, yeah, because this is after the commando orders. So the guys, Fowles Pool got through. I mean, it was pretty horrendous. They got captured. They got liberated quite quickly by the Yanks. The Americans got them out, but it was another suicide job. And at one point, they thought they were, because it was one of those ones that we're going to go, we're not going to go. And at the point they said, "Oh, the operation's off," everybody in the SS went, "Oh, thank the Lord for that. That was a right suicide job." And then, of course, they went, "That operation's back on." And so the team had to, having been told by all the old sweats, this is a suicide job, because these were new guys, they then realized that they really didn't have a prayer and they were being parachuted with very little hope of recovery. Some brave men. Yes, but so go back. Yes, Eisenhower, just to talk about why they were parachuted so far into France. The Jedburgh operation, which is the operation to basically support the Maquis. So there was the Americans had been creating the Office of Strategic Services, so the OSS, which is a precursor to the CIA. And the idea was they would be able to team up with the Maquis and help them, call in weapon supplies, call in airstrikes, and improve their effectiveness. Now, the problem with the OSS and SOE is that's the British equivalent, which is the Special Operations Executive, is they've got no teeth. They can't fight. They're small teams. And what the Americans, Eisenhower, had hoped was that he'd be able to augment the OSS with the Special Air Service, that the Special Air Service would come in as, sort of to be the strong men as part of that operation. And that's why he sent, I think it was General Bull, so his chief planning officer, he sent him in to see Freddie de Guigan, who's Monty's right-hand man, and say, you're not going to use the SS like that. And actually, I've got the signal here. I think, oh no, the opera order here, it says, this is from Eisenhower, nominal command of SS troops as part of Airborne Corps remains vested with 21st Army Group, that's Monty. However, since SAS troops are likely to be used mainly in the strategic role and in conjunction with resistant groups, their overall control will be subject to SHAFE. So that's his outfit. So he's telling Monty in writing, because he had to tell Monty things in black and white, because if you didn't tell Monty things in black and white, he might interpret them differently.
Yes, so that's pretty clear. And that's interesting, actually, because if we just sort of step back a bit before we delve into the operation itself, the SS by now has built up quite a reputation. And I suppose there wasn't a unit like that Eisenhower had at his disposal.
No.
On the American side.
No, they didn't. The Americans didn't have a special force. They did have the US Rangers, but the US Rangers, I mean, all of this was created by Dudley Clark, who's, the maverick deception officer. He created the SAS, he created the commandos, and actually he created the US Rangers because when Roosevelt sent a sort of fact-find mission to the UK and then out to Cairo, Wild Bill Donovan, who was he was a guy that Roosevelt had sent to find out what was going on in the war. First of all, in Britain, to find out whether we were going to stay in the war. And then secondly, sent him to the Middle East to find out what was going on out there. And he met with Clark in Cairo, and in Cairo, Clark handed him a manila envelope containing the whole plans for the commandos. And so when Donovan went back, they created the US Ranger Group, but they were commandos. So the difference between commandos, US Rangers, and the SAS is that both commandos and US Rangers are shock troops. They're battalions. They go ashore ahead of everyone else. The SS are strategic troops, and they operate in small bands behind enemy lines doing strategic operations.
Okay. Right. So the region is southeastern France. It's near Dijon. It's Burgundy. It's a lovely part of the world, actually.
Yeah.
How heavy were the German troops in that area?
Well, they were really thin on the ground. So, but if you look at a map, so the reason, if you talk about, so basically you've got B Squadron 1 SAS does Bull Basket, which is over towards, it's in Poitiers region. So that's between Paris and La Rochelle and Bordeaux. And then A Squadron 1 SAS does Hounsworth, which is south of Paris, between Paris and the Riviera in the Morvan Forest. And the reason those two operations are selected and crucial is if you look at the railway map of France, that's where the railways go from the coastline through Paris to Normandy. So strategically, what Eisenhower's trying to do is, and he sent a signal to the SAS group saying, can you get aircraft? Can you get the aircraft as far south as Morvan? Because he's trying to stop the Germans moving forces up to Normandy. And he's going to drop the SAS into those regions to augment the effectiveness of the Marquis and the OSS units, the SOE units, and cut those lines of communication.
And the Marquis, how organised are they? Because certainly when I think of the French resistance, it's sort of small groups of very brave fighters here and there, but not really great numbers.
Well, no, yeah, that's that. I think that if you're looking at the sort of earlier part of the war, you're right. But by now, you've got great big bands hiding out in the forest. I mean, and they're coming over fast because Marquis are recruiting. Whole gendarme units are coming over. With some weapons and stuff. They're a motley band. There's a lot of communists amongst them because of the political situation in France. The question for the Allies is how much can we trust everyone's got an agenda. For the communists, the agenda is we're going to take control of France. I mean, to put it bluntly, that's what they want to do. So if you start supplying large amounts of weapons to these groups, what are you going to end up with after we've retaken France? You could end up with a civil war. So I think everyone in the OSS and SOE is aware that arming these units could be bad news in the long run.
So far better to send in small groups of highly trained, highly experienced specialist units, and so they send in the SAS.
Yeah, send in the SAS. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, so if you go to Bull Basket is the A Squadron operation that goes in near Poitiers. Now we just got. I mean that is the disastrous operation because of the commando order, and the commando order was issued by Hitler. So there's a little bit of history to that. Is that the Germans had got increasingly annoyed with commandos who'd been causing them a lot of trouble in North Africa, and then a lot of covert raids. And this really came to head on an operation on the Isle of Sark, where Anders Lassen was involved. Anders Lassen, so big war hero. In fact, it's a film coming out. Anders Lassen is so the operation was called Bull Basalt, and it's a small-scale raiding force. So this is before 2SAS exists, and they do a raid in Sark with 12 commando, during which 5 prisoners of war are taken, and they're either gagged or stuffed with grass, depending who you read. Mouth stuffed with grass to stop them screaming out. One is shot with his hands behind his back. They're all bound. Their hands are bound. One is shot because apparently he cries out, and then one is shot trying to escape. But you can see how that looks from the German angle. You've got 5 men who were taken prisoner, disarmed, had their arms bound behind their backs, and then 2 of them are shot. And that really triggers the commando order, which is that Hitler going, I'm not going to tolerate this. These are no longer abiding by the rule. I mean, this is Hitler, right? They're no longer playing by the Geneva Convention. I mean, who is he to say something like that? But that's what he does, and he issues the commando order, which also applies to pilots. It means if we catch them behind the lines, we're going to kill them. And so in Bull Basket, that is unfortunately what happens. There's a big German attack, and B Squadron get captured. I mean, 33 men get executed, put in shallow graves. 3 wounded are given lethal injections in hospital. There was 1 US Mustang pilot amongst them. He was captured and dug his own grave and then shot. And it was awful, really awful.
But the people who perpetrated this, did justice catch up with them?
Yeah, there was, and there was an immediate flash straight afterwards. Because they knew about it pretty quickly with this was going on, and there was an immediate kind of massive air raid. I think it was mounted by mosquitoes. Someone will tell me. I don't know. There was an attempt by the RAF to immediately punish the Germans for that thing.
Right. Right.
But there were atrocities all over France. I mean, the same thing happened down in Hounsworth, where Fraser was. The Germans, Fraser started operating. So this is William Fraser and A Squadron. They parachute into Morvan. The weather initially was awful.
What date is this?
10th June, just after D-Day. Yeah.
So they're all dropping in these parts of France in the immediate days following.
Oh, in the immediate days afterwards. So you get so with Hounsworth, you've got a recce party that goes in first, and then they start to build up. So they start with the recce parties, then they parachute men, and the key thing about that is they have something called a phantom team. So a phantom team is strategic communications team. So they can radio directly back to Britain and call in both air supplies and also call in airstrikes. So this is actually fast forwarding to modern special forces. This is the beginning of what you consider Delta Force doing in Afghanistan or something. This is the future, that they're doing all the things that you know now. They're working with local forces. They're calling in strategic air to take out railway sidings and stuff, and they're parachuting in equipment. And of course, the other thing they parachute in is their jeeps. They bring their jeeps down.
And so these radios must have been, were they specially made? Because I'm always reading in these books on the Second World War, for the infantry, their radios are hopeless. They're never really working very well, or at least that's the case in sort of mainland Europe. I think in the desert they were quite good, weren't they?
Yeah, I think the problem is early on, particularly for the command. If you talk about all the commando raids early on, are a disaster because their radios don't survive contact with the water, or they break when they're parachuting. But by now they've sorted it out. So the Phantom team, they're Phantoms which control strategic communications. So they're updating, and if you get the transcripts, they're updating daily. They come up every evening, report what the unit's doing, what supplies they need, and they coordinate the drop zones to resupply and bring in more men. And then you have Eureka, which is the direct communications to aircraft, which means they can talk to aircraft above their heads, which is another innovation. Do you know what I mean? They don't talk. They're the recognition signal, so that the Allies can see that that they're down there and they're not just dropping into the equipment to the Germans. Yeah. So yeah, Fraser parachutes in with A Squadron. Initially, the weather's absolutely awful, so they can't get much in. But then they start to build up strength. They bring in some jeeps, and then they manage to start operating. The Germans quickly realise they've got to remove A Squadron from the forest, so they start to mount a very big attack. And Fraser takes them out. He gets around behind them with a couple of Bren guns, and they get absolutely smashed. I mean, he waits.
So we're not talking tanks here, and
No.
and the SAS are in full uniform.
They're in their smocks. Yeah, they're in there. They're not operating in civilian clothes. So they're with the Marquis. Fraser actually moves out of the Marquis camp and forms an SAS camp because he realizes being co-located with the French resistance is bad for security and bad for all sorts of reasons. Though he does take
the wafts of garlic was just too much for them.
Well, I think Fraser liked the red wine anyway, so I think he was drinking that because apparently he took a lot of that with him. And so did Maine when he turned up, but he wasn't there yet. But no, the Germans realise they've got to get rid of this threat. It's causing them. It's going to cause them a headache. It starts causing them a headache. They send about 200 men into the forest. But you can imagine it's quite tough. This is, the Morvan Forest is a thick forest, no roads, real roads going into it, and they've got to fight their way in. And essentially, the Macquarie and the Germans start having a very big battle. So Fraser takes a couple of Bren guns, goes round to where they're going to form up to go back, and when they form up, machine guns a lot of them, and destroys them. So sort of classic SAS operation.
Yeah.
But the tragedy is the Germans then take it out on the civilian population, and they go into the local village, and they hang the padre, the vicar. They rape a young girl. They kill 17 people. It's pretty dreadful. I mean, I think the Nazi at the end of the war, the Nazis are just getting desperate, aren't they? And everything gets more amped up, and National Socialism's come off the rails, and these people are just doing what they want. But to be fair to the French, they do not betray Fraser. They stay loyal to him, and they don't betray where he is or what he's doing, though some of the locals do know where the SS camp is.
So in Fraser's case, then, is this Is this genuinely strategically worthwhile? And I guess what I'm really asking, is it worth the loss of those, of the treatment of the local population? Was it strategically worthwhile?
I mean, that's such a question, isn't it? I mean, it's
Mm,
like the bombing, the enormous numbers of French civilians who died in the anticipation of Normandy. It's an impossible question to ask. I mean, the reason Fraser was there is because there's been Clark's deception has kept the Germans down at the French Riviera. And he's very effective. I mean, A Squadron are incredibly effective at stopping those troops moving. They constantly blow up the railway. They put basically a block. All those road rail links run adjacent to the Malvern Forest, and they're all over them all the time. It becomes impossible for the Germans to move stuff north. And I think that's the key thing about this operation is that it's a forerunner for what could be done, and it is a proper, SAS strategic operation. People died, civilians died. Was it worth it? I don't know. I can't answer that question. I don't know.
yeah. So I guess, as you've mentioned, this is this is classic SAS tactics that would be employed for many years after.
Yeah, I mean, I think the SS was the first special force before, Delta Force, Navy SEALs, and the rest of them. And this was probably certainly in the Second World War, this was the pinnacle of special forces operations. I mean, I think Eisenhower, realizing that they could be used strategically, which is what they'd always been created to do, taking them away from the operational commander, who was Montgomery, and then really thinking about where is the most effective place to deploy these troops, given their skill sets. And lest we forget, that they had been misemployed recently. So if you take one SAS, they'd only been turned back into one SAS just prior to D-Day. They'd been called the Special Raiding Squadron in Italy, and they'd been part of a commando brigade doing shock troop action, which was not their skill sets. These are very, very experienced operators who spent months behind enemy lines. And this is the thing they can do that no one else can do. So you may as well use your high value troops in this way.
Yeah, I guess the timing it's in 1944, middle of 1944, so they've had all these years to perfect their skill set. And I know listeners will be hearing about the struggles that the Germans had in reinforcing to counterattack against the Allies in the beaches. The SAS were a key part in causing trouble for them in that regard.
They were. So you had 1 and 2 SAS doing this role, but actually the French SAS, so that's the 2nd and 3rd battalions, confusingly they're the the 3rd and 4th SAS battalions, but they're the 2nd and 3rd chasseurs. I won't go into that because it confused everyone. But there were 2 other SS battalions deployed, and they were deployed actually more operationally and tactically within 21st Army Group's area. Well, one was deployed in front of 21st Army Group, and then one was deployed in front of Patton's group when they came ashore. So that whole airborne operation, you're right, the Pegasus Bridge, the whole thing of trying to use these airborne troops in that way. But the difference with the deep penetration raids, these were much more special forces. These were like, I'm going to go and work with the locals. We're going to augment their power, with airstrikes and weapons and heavy weapons and our skills, and our mobility with our jeeps. And they had towed artillery, which was parachuted in, so they had anti-tank weapons. And we're going to be able to radio and call in, strategic airstrikes. So you're right. This was the precursor to what modern special forces became.
Just fast forwarding a little bit to the end of the war, what happened to the 2 French SAS, the 3rd and 4th? Did they then get subsumed within the French army as a special unit, or did they get disbanded?
They go back to being paras, yeah, but they operate as part of the SS brigade. So Operation Amherst was another operation up in Belgium, commanded by Mike Calvert, Mad Mike Calvert, who was then the brigade commander, famous SS man. So yeah, they operate, but there is a very strong link there between the 2 units, and of course there was a Belgium SAS as well, which was the 5th battalion of the. But they really don't come into the D-Day story because they get deployed much later on. I mean, the key to the D-Day story really the key to the D-Day story is really 1 SAS, A Squadron and B Squadron. Those were the 2 front runners, and they went in to try and do this, cut the lines of supply.
Well, it's such a great story because we've been hearing about how successful Pegasus Bridge was, and on Thursday, listeners will get a treat hearing about the amphibious landing. It sounds like, the Battle for Normandy, D-Day, and as you've just illustrated today, so many moving parts. It was a huge success. It could have gone a lot worse, but it was a stunning success, the operation in 1944.
Yeah, it was. And I think from the one thing I would stress that deception plays a very big role in, I think, everything the SS does during the war. And I've alluded to Dudley Clark because when he created the commandos, which were the precursor to all special forces, the commandos he created back in 1940, his idea, this was around the time of Dunkirk, was that you could send these small bands of men and you could deceive the enemy as to what you're up to. You could disperse the enemy's strength by sending them back across the channel. So fast forward to now, you've got these special forces operations going on, Titanic, Houndsworth. It's to keep the Germans also guessing about what we're up to, and it did work because Operation Fortitude, which pinned the Germans in Calais for way too long. I mean, they were still hanging around after we'd gone ashore. And that was Clark's playbook. That's what he did in Sicily, what he did in Italy, what he did in North Africa, augment the special forces, using special forces to augment the deception as well, And the only reason the Germans were stuck down in the south of France is because he was deceiving them that we were going to land there.
Where was Clark by this stage? Was he in the operations room in London somewhere?
No, that's the weirdest thing about this story. He was twice offered the job to take over deception in Britain and turned it down. And that's an odd decision, except I think the problem with Britain is it was very hard to get things done in the War Office. In Whitehall, it was a big sort of slow-moving, fossilized organization. I mean, they were terrible at deception. Their first attempt at deception was a fake two fake convoys invading France in 1943, and the Germans didn't react. They didn't really get, because of course everyone, I don't know, your audience probably know what double cross is. So double cross was the fake agents, the double agents who were able to feed the Germans these stories. They had that up and running, but they didn't use it for deception until really Clark's influence and Strange Ways and Wilde, who his disciples arrived in the UK. They really didn't get that you could deceive the Germans in this way, which of course saved hundreds of lives.
Well, Tom, this has been fantastic.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks so much. Links are in the show notes for listeners for the books. They've got a lot of D-Day material to get through, the listeners. I feel for them, but it's all great stuff. And we're going to speak again in August, I think, to talk a little bit about a film that you had, quite a lot to do with, wrote, produced, and directed.
Yes, that will be completely different. Different. Let's focus on Normandy, which is the thing we're on at the moment, isn't it?
Indeed. So this is the second episode, and listeners, you have Gordon Corrigan and Philip Blood. Gordon takes the role of the Allied historian, and Philip Blood is the German historian, and they both take us through D-Day from both sides. So that's I've just finished that conversation. It's coming out on the day, so you've got that to look forward to, and you'll enjoy it.
Brilliant.
Tom, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Ollie. Always good to come on here. Brilliant.
Thanks for listening. Links are in the show notes. Please do share, and if you can leave a gentle review, I'd be grateful. But in the meantime, thank you and good night.